Is a Monday meeting edition of Conversations with Al McFarlane. Many of you will notice right off the bat, I am not Al McFarlane. I am stand-in today, Harry Colbert. I'm the managing editor with Insight News, and I'm here with Marcus Harcus and David Beckford. Marcus is with the campaign for the full legalization of marijuana, and David is with the
Minorities for Medical Marijuana. We'll soon be setting up a chapter here in Minnesota, so we're excited about that. I'm also with Dynasty Television.
one of my St. Louis homeboys. So we go back. Obviously, judging by the titles that are given, today's conversation is going to be about the legalization of marijuana, not just medical marijuana, but recreational, the full legalization of marijuana. But most importantly, what are the ramifications for black people when it comes to it on the not only the criminal side but on the business side? This conversation struck a chord with me because I listen to talk radio all the time or talk television, but when I'm on my radio, it's plugged in there. And one of the commercials that they'll air on the radio, you'll hear former Speaker of the House, John Boehner, Republican former Speaker, and he's advertising for seminars on how to make money off of marijuana. Now, keep in mind, while he was in the legislature, he was part of a group that was making sure that people of color, in particular black and brown people, were criminalized at the federal level for nonviolent offenses.
Well, he said he wasn't aware of that, right? That's what he heard. That's what I heard on the NPR story. He wasn't aware of what was going on.
Just slipped past him. Yeah.
For years.
Yes. But now he's making money off of it. And when I say money, I'm not talking a little money. I'm talking big money. They're selling seminars all across the nation, advertising how to make money off of the industry and in particular off of companies that have gone public and making money off of the stocks. So here in Minnesota, you've been fighting for the legalization of marijuana. Where does that fight stand? There was recently a vote.
So we first began to see full legalization bills introduced in 2017, but nothing was happening at all. In that year, the legislature was Republican controlled in the House and the Senate. Last year we had an election. We elected a pro-legalization governor, which we didn't have in Mark Dayton, who was a prohibitionist. And we elected a Democrat majority in the House. And to date, most of the legalization supporters in the legislature are Democrats. So we potentially have a House that could pass a bill, but we have the Senate, which is under Republican control. They have the majority. That they're the party of prohibition. So we had our first committee hearing ever for a legalization bill on Monday, this past Monday, the 11th, a week from today, and the Senate killed it. The Senate Judiciary Committee killed the bill. So legalization is not going to pass in Minnesota this year, but there's also, we introduced a bill. We wrote our own bill. It's called the Full Legalization Act, House File 2285, which was introduced also last Monday. So the other bill died, but our bill was born. And this is a bill that we're calling the People's Bill. We'll likely get a hearing in the House this session, but it will only be an informational hearing. So the soonest we're likely to see a bill passed would be in 2020. And that would just be in the House. We're going to have to flip the Senate next year in the 2020 election so that the Democrats can gain control, and then we may have some hope to see a legalization bill passed by 2021.
When we're talking about legalization, and right now in Minnesota we have legalization for medical marijuana, and you have to have cause, and it can be varying. I read anything from bad headaches to epilepsy, things of that nature. But when we talk about recreational, why is it important to have that legalization? Why do you feel it's important, in particular for black people?
Well, first of all, I personally, when I hear medical versus recreational, I'm thinking it's like saying recreational garlic and medicinal garlic. It's garlic. That's my position. But there's over 500,000 adult cannabis consumers in Minnesota. Only 15,000 have access. Maybe 22,000 now have access to this program. We all deserve safe legal access. No one should be criminalized for this healing plant, regardless of what the reason you use it. And I really believe everyone who uses it, they enjoy it because it gives them some type of pain relief, whether it's physical, mental, or emotional. So it's a healing plant. It's not a crime. Prohibition is the problem. It's not cannabis. This is a tool used by law enforcement to harass, seize property, and arrest people for something that's a nonviolent victimless crime. So, there's no good reason to justify prohibition, but there's multiple imperatives. And just to summarize it, one is like respecting personal freedom. Adults should be able to do this if they want to, if they're harming no one. It'll increase public safety because this corrupts law enforcement, and it forces all these people who desire to use this natural healing plant to seek it from an illicit market where it's unregulated, where it's dangerous, where there are a lot of bad actors, and there's a lot of products that we don't know if they're contaminated or not. So it's definitely a public safety issue. It's a public health issue. Cannabis is not this dangerous killer drug that they've made it out to be. It's really actually an exit drug. This is something that helps people overcome alcoholism, tobacco addictions, opiate addictions, meth addictions. The government has been lying to us about this for 80 years, and it's time to end all this nonsense. And the final thing is the economic development. If there's 500,000 consumers right now,
Yes.
there's $1 billion industry right now.
Yes.
It's just untaxed, it's unregulated, and so we might as well bring it above ground. We could create thousands of jobs, hundreds of businesses, generate hundreds of millions of dollars in revenue that can be invested in good things, and it'll keep all of these consumers safe.
David, on the business aspect of this, and we were talking off air earlier about basically a lot of entities are coming together to try to figure out where they can make money off of this. And in many of those meetings, you say 97%, 98% are people who don't look like us.
It's true. It's true. And almost, I have to give it a 3% differential just to keep just to stay positive, if you will. But Harry, we're going to meetings. M4MM, we started out on the patient advocacy side, right? And so the medical marijuana entrance was top priority for us. And based on that, we're going to conventions and workshops and seminars. And again, what you said is true. It's 99% darn near. And there's nothing wrong with people wanting to get in the industry, but it always kind of pains me that, again, many minority-based or African Americans don't show up for these meetings, right? Understand, but they are, like you said, they are consumers, and many of them are participating in the black market as well, right? Well, some of them, on some kind of level. But when you have this opportunity to say, I'm gonna take all of the resources and the skill sets that I'm getting from, organizations like Oaksterdam University, right? But you don't show up, that just pains me. So it's, to some degree, it's on us, to get the information out to the people and to make sure that they are aware of what's going on and can come to these events. But in many instances, these events are not put together by us, right? And there is no consistent marketing effort to disseminate that information to communities of color.
Well, you touched on something. You said sometimes we don't show up because we just don't even know. What's going on in terms of an education campaign to let more African Americans, more people of color, know about the opportunities, the legal opportunities to make money off of this industry, which is one of the more fast-growing growth industries out there?
Well, again, that's where I'm so excited about the work that M4MM is doing. In Missouri alone, we are doing what we call the boot camp. And the boot camp is a 4-weekend event taking place at the University of Missouri St. Louis campus. Where we're bringing in everybody. It doesn't matter what level. If you just got out of prison yesterday, today you can learn entrance into this entrance into the industry. You can network with people. You can learn where the ancillary businesses are as well. Part of it is, again, we've got to get the information out. One of the ways we're doing it, we partnered with my company, Dynasty Television, and we created what we call the M4MM dashboard. And so all of the chapter presidents, if you will, of those 25 states, we actually brought together and began to share this type of information on our Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and LinkedIn pages. So collectively, by myself, I don't reach a lot of people, but with their help, we reach about 600,000 people across the country every day, telling them about all of these opportunities that exist, these workshops, seminars, all of this free information that's out there. Matter of fact, we have 3 different people who are attorneys in the organizations, and they're talking about the legalization of it, right? From the policy standpoint and development and how people can get involved. We've got people who are promoting the cannabis stock side. So if you don't want to touch flower and nor have the opportunity to do it and taking the risks that are inherent with that, you might be able to come in as a investor in the industry, right? We've been able to connect people to the employment side of it as well in other states that have either recreational or medical marijuana. So through the power of social media and now partnering with organizations like McFarlane Media and Insight News, now we're getting podcasts out and getting on the radio and getting this information out en masse.
And Marcus, is your organization doing anything to work on the legal side of, as we mentioned at the start of the program, we have way too many brothers and sisters who have been incarcerated for nonviolent drug offenses, in particular marijuana. Is there a movement afoot to kind of get with government agencies to expunge and or pardon these individuals?
Absolutely. If you look at our bill, HF 2285, the Full Legalization Act, also known as the People's Act, there's definitely a provision that talks about clearing records. The thing about expungements in Minnesota, it's equivalent to sealing a record. So we're trying to go further by advocating for them to vacate and dismiss the records, which means erasing the records, not just sealing it, but erasing it. So this is a more innovative approach to legalization than has been done anywhere else. Because with expungement, the counties have to send out notifications to people who are eligible. They have to receive those notifications. They have to know what to do with those notifications. If people don't have representation and they're not legally savvy on their own, they may miss the opportunity. So there's good intentions with the talk of expungement, but if it's not done automatically by government, a lot of people are going to fall through the cracks, and it's time intensive. So this is a process that could take years. So we want to have this done automatically by government, and we're definitely, everyone knows about the racial disparity. All the prosecutors, the police, all the legislators know about this. It's just a matter of whether or not they care or not. And I'm not a partisan guy, but the Republicans generally do not care. I mean, if we want to see full legalization, and we're going to have to remove the Republicans from control of our legislature.
And when we talk about the, just recently here in Hennepin County Attorney Mike Freeman recently said that they are going to halt the prosecution of, I believe it's up to 25 grams of marijuana.
It's up to 100.
Up to 100 grams of marijuana.
Which is just short of like a quarter pound or 4 ounces.
Okay, so that's a step in the right direction. As the he also just less than 2 weeks ago released a dashboard showing that 65% of all prosecutions in Hennepin County are of African Americans. So there's once again showing that entire disparity. And while we're having this conversation, there might be some people who are thinking that we are just completely advocating for this illicit substance, and I think in many ways the conversation needs to be one informative and on an educational level, and then also understanding that while this is the conversation in 2019, in 1919 the conversation was alcohol,
Right.
The same way, and we recently had conversations about tobacco use and things of that nature. So just to kind of put that out there, that changing times and more so, I guess, a changing understanding, because you advocated as a healing plant and less of a drug.
I mean, it
on
is
that.
a drug. It's a psychotropic drug, but it's not the dangerous killer drug that the media has made it out to be, and the media took their cues from the government. I mean, cannabis was a known medicine for thousands of years, and even in the United States, it was in the U.S. pharmacopoeia for decades, from the late 1800s through the early 1900s. And so it's been known to be a medicine for a long time. And when they criminalized cannabis, it was the people who had been in charge of regulating alcohol prohibition, so enforcing alcohol prohibition, especially a guy named Harry Anslinger. And so he was looking for something else to do. So you see the timing. Cannabis was prohibited in 1937. Alcohol prohibition was ended in 1933. It was repealed then. So they had a campaign in between the repeal of alcohol prohibition and leading to the enactment of cannabis prohibition. And the whole history is based on pseudoscience and racism, political corruption, and for-profit policing. Because the agency that was formed to initially enforce marijuana prohibition, that became the DEA. And today, the DEA's budget is over $2 billion annually. Well, why are they against legalization? Because half of all the drug arrests are for cannabis. So if you legalize that, you're threatening the budgets of law enforcement from the highest levels down to the local police departments. So, I mean, it's important to study history because you can learn from it. And because the society didn't learn from alcohol prohibition, we repeated the same mistake with cannabis, except this one's going on for over 80 years. So, I mean, if you look at the history of the drug war, starting with Richard Nixon, I mean, it's extremely obvious that this is all wrong. It's all bad. It does no good. It makes no sense. It's expensive. It's racist. And it's failed. I mean, you have 40 million Americans, U.S. Americans, who are consumers. If prohibiting this was supposed to stop them, well, it failed. And then arresting 1 million people a year, I mean, what good is that?
Well, we understand the impact of arresting 1 million people a year, right? And the United States is the highest, leads the globe, right, in our incarceration.
Right.
That adds up to dollars, right?
Yeah.
You know, let's cut to the chase, right? You know, let's talk about anytime there is a political movement that doesn't represent the interests of the people, then it's about money. Okay, and as we've all heard, we follow the money, then we'll get to the truth. So I believe this is about money in Minnesota, right? I believe we started this conversation talking about a John Boehner, and I'm not trying to single out a John Boehner, but John Boehner is in the private market now, making what? Money, okay? I've been to these conferences. Some of them cost $3,000-$4,000 to just show up, to get the basic information that we're giving people for free every day, right? So this is, this is something when you're dealing with that level of capital investment to get to what they said in 2021, this is going to be a $20 billion industry. That's a lot of billions of dollars, right? It takes the will of the people to change that course. Exactly. And so what I'm interested in is, I'm a believer in giant steps, right? But it's like football. It's a game of inches, right? So what incremental things can be done? What can Dave Beckford do if I read 600,000 people in social media every day talking about these issues, how do I get from talk to action, right? And then how can the average Joe below Minnesota get involved? What can they
So
do?
to that point, how do we get from talk to action?
Yes.
So what's the suggestion? How
This
do
is
we get
the expert. I'm throwing it out there.
I
He's
mean,
put in the work.
the answer is organizing.
Yes.
I mean, me alone going up to the Capitol is not going to be enough. Me and the dozens of people who are involved in our organizations is not going to be enough on an issue that's this controversial, where you have law enforcement literally showing up and scaring these legislators. You know, they're coming to sell fear, and the legislators are buying it. So we need to organize a statewide campaign, which we're doing, to build the strength in numbers, to influence these election outcomes, to hold prohibitionists accountable. Next year is an election year. At least 3 of those 6 Republican senators on the Judiciary Committee are going to be removed from office because they live in competitive districts, and we're getting organized to push them out. I mean, once they're held accountable, once they become afraid to continue standing on the wrong side of history against justice, they're going to start, changing their mind enough where we get this done.
Okay, so I want to put this out there because, as we mentioned earlier, Hennepin County Attorney Mike Freeman said that they're not going to prosecute crimes of 100. You said it's 100 grams or less. That being said, let's be very mindful when we state this. Just because he's not going to prosecute, it doesn't mean that currently, right now, in the state of Minnesota, it is not illegal. So it needs to be stated because brothers and sisters need to know that they can still get stopped for it. They can still be arrested for it. They can still be
hundreds
harassed
of dollars
for
and
it.
thousands of
They
dollars.
can and they can also, it can open the door to if you're stopped for marijuana, it opens the door to say, oh well, now we can look beyond that stop and say, well, what's here, what's there. So let's be very mindful, because I see brothers and sisters, and a lot of them will come up to me and got that loud, and I'm like, you're a little too loud about the fact that you got that loud. And that's not. We want to do whatever we can to reduce our chances of negative interaction with police. So I want to be very, very clear in stating that, yes, they're not going to prosecute according to his word, but understand that under the statutes right now in the state of Minnesota, recreational marijuana is still illegal, and we want all of our people to be careful out there. So that needs to be stated.
Brother Marcus, I got a question. And I look at it, purely from a business standpoint and trying to understand all of the needs of the people, right? And so you got various stakeholders at the table, including law enforcement, right? So you got law enforcement, you've got the Republicans, you got the Democratic base, you have the people themselves. Once, from a business standpoint, you do a critical analysis and you understand the stakeholders, who they are, identify them, and identify what they need, right? And so from a holistic standpoint, has that type of analysis been done, where you're bringing together all of these groups, and not just to have a yelling match and a difference of opinion, but to figure out what do the police need, right? What do they need? So for instance, like you just said, the attorney general has said, I'm not going to prosecute these cases, but I read that the real damage is not necessarily just on the prosecution side, but it is the thousands of dollars that's missed in earned income missed when you got to go to court, and when you're getting constantly stopped, and then you got this warrant out for something else, child support, and next thing you know, you caught up in the system, right? So has there been any, I guess, 10,000-mile view critical analysis to understand the needs of every one of these stakeholders?
Well, we haven't gone into depth about what law enforcement needs. I mean, obviously, they need some training to undo the conditioning of the drug war, because there's a group called Law Enforcement Action Partnership. They used to be called Law Enforcement Against Prohibition. It's mostly bunch of retired cops and some judges and prosecutors who are against prohibition, and they're retired so they can speak freely. But their executive director, Neil Franklin, who was a drug war cop for over 30 years in Maryland and a lot of time in Baltimore, he's a brother. He said, like, the police are addicted to the probable cause that they can use with this. This is one of the easiest ways to search or harass people and seize properties. It's one of the easiest ways to arrest people. But we've got to, the police have been conditioned to do this broken windows policing. They've been conditioned to thinking racial profiling is okay. You know, they've been conditioned that mass incarceration is the way. I mean, the paradigm in law enforcement is that the quantity of arrests is how you measure your effectiveness, not necessarily the quantity. So that's why they love these low-level petty offenses, that it inflates their arrest numbers. It makes them look, it's the illusion of productivity. So it's quantity over quality. So I personally believe that law enforcement need to be trained to undo that thinking and undo those terrible practices that really drive a lot of division between community members who don't even commit crimes, except maybe they are cannabis consumers. I mean, this is not good for them except financially. So, I mean, that's a stakeholder group that we have to engage. And our plan was, after this legislative session, which ends May 20th, to reach out to all of these county sheriffs. There's 4 law enforcement lobby groups that are fighting this. It's the Minnesota Sheriff's Association, it's the Police Chiefs Association, it's the Peace Officers Association, and it's the County Attorneys Association. So there's 87 counties in Minnesota. After this session, we're going to reach out to all of the sheriffs and all of the county attorneys. In Minnesota, they call district attorneys, or what they call in other states, state attorneys. They call them county attorneys here. But we're going to reach out to all of them, and we're going to try to reach out to, like, chiefs of police too, through their association. But we're trying to engage them. If they're legitimately afraid because of all the propaganda that they've consumed, and especially internalized so they can justify doing this to us, they need to be educated. Yes. So we were sitting in this hearing last week listening. I don't know if it was completely intentional that they're lying up there, but they're presenting a lot of misinformation that you'll be convinced they believe. So they're up there spreading this misinformation that's not benefiting the public at all. So we do need to engage all of those stakeholders. And one thing the legislature tried to do this session was to propose a cannabis task force, which would bring together all of these stakeholder groups.
Under the governor, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, okay.
Some
Is that
legislative
going
leaders.
forward?
Well, the Senate killed it on Monday.
Okay.
So, but this is something the governor can do on his own. I think the intention was to have the discussion through all these various committees in the legislature, in both the House and the Senate. So they're forcing the legislators to have the discussion, and then if they were to produce this task force, then it looks like something that the legislature did on their own to advance it. But Republicans are against it because, as one of them said, it's a gateway to legalization. But it's really a way. It's a good idea in the sense that it brings all of these law enforcement lobbies, and it brings all these people who would be responsible for regulating it, and brings the leaders to the table, and community members to discuss each of their varying interests or their concerns. And there's a group called SAM, Smart Approaches to Marijuana. They're a national group that formed a Minnesota chapter. They're the ones that organized the opposition testimonies at the hearing on Monday. They're a national organization. They're now here local because they see legalization is coming in Minnesota.
It's on the table, right?
But we have reached out to them, and we even did a joint press conference saying we're going to do a series of joint community forums, which will actually be debates. So we'll listen to each other respectfully, and we'll debate. I mean, we'll compare our facts, you know.
You know, well, it's interesting, and it's awesome to see that you guys are reaching across the table and working with the opposition, if you will, and because once you understand, and you made a perfect point. There's so much misinformation that's out there.
Mostly.
We're in cannabis conferences where we're supposed to be, where people are supposed to be on our side giving out misinformation, right?
Right.
Especially when it comes to communities of color and the social equity impact. So that's awesome that you guys are doing that type of work. One of the things, you know, as I began to Harry, Marcus and I have been talking about, you know, helping to get the word out and do some, you know, social media dissemination. So even today, we're going to be joining our pages together and connecting the dots on being able to organically and exponentially, you know, increase our reach. Man, as I started looking at similar organizations, the Normals here and the Sensible Minnesotas and all the above, you guys probably reach millions of people collectively and don't even know it. And the direct impact of being able to reach those people is, when you said it spot on, we get ready to replace the legislation. Because if you get 3% of the people that you guys reach right now in Minnesota to turn out for that election, it's game over. Legalization is actualization, right? So that is a direct opportunity to be in control of information dissemination and to make sure that people get the accurate information. Because, like I said, it's basic advertising to me. With police, you've been advertised and promoted. Bad, 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 bad. So now I've got to run my good commercial to you 30 times a day, right? What better way to do it than to hit you up on your timeline and you see this information. So it's awesome work that's being done right now, and awesome work that's getting ready to be done in Minnesota. And I'm excited because I want to bring, you know, Minnesota's no different than many other states, you know, Florida, Missouri, all of the above. And I want to bring that type of the work and the resources that the people have done to be successful in other states. I want them to partner with you guys here. Okay.
Yeah, we need to learn from the states that have done what we're trying to do, or at least are further ahead than us.
This has been a very important conversation, and this is the start. This isn't the end. But we wanted to thank our audience for tuning in, and also we ask that you engage, whether you are for or against the legalization of recreational marijuana. We want to have the conversation. That's what's most important about all of this. So again, I appreciate Marcus and David for joining us for this special Monday edition of Conversations with Al McFarlane, and I am a guest host, Harry Colbert, managing editor of Insight News. And with that, again, if you have any comments or questions, please feel free to hit us up on our website, insightnews.com, or one of our many social media platforms, Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, Insight News. Thank you so much.
Thank you.